Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, I had a custom mic on and it keeps breaking. It's very fidgety. So then I switched to the AirPods, which don't sound great, but at least they're consistent. Hire a sound engineer. What do you think? This is a professional operation? Okay. Um, this is not a professional operation. I don't know. We can keep fiddling with the audio. I can try something different if you want, or we can just get into it. What do you think? Should we go? Next 5 votes. Go or try again on the audio. Okay, we're gonna go. Good. We're underway. Hello, Periscope. I actually have nothing to talk about, but I figured I would let you folks drive the agenda. What's on your mind? I'm actually not far away from the mic. I'm wearing AirPods, those little Apple wireless headphones that I like so much. They only do so much, however. Some people say it's fine, some people say it's not. Okay. People are saying let's start. Okay, what do people want to discuss? What is on your mind? I don't come to these things with an agenda because I have no agenda. So I'm literally here for you. What can I help you with? Advice for making new friends. Be the kind of person that people want to be friends with. What written media do you pay for? Stratechery. Ben Thompson's Stratechery. Have I read the book The Four Agreements? Yes, I have. It was okay. It was a little fluffy for me, but I liked it. I've recommended that in The Fifth Agreement in the past. Who are the 3 people you most admire in Silicon Valley? I don't want to pick just 3. There's lots of great people in Silicon Valley. It's a magnet for creators and doers. Howard Schultz not getting a good reception for president. Yes, well, the time of elites is over. Donald Trump only won because he's essentially a populist / nationalist. Even though he is, of course, an elite by birth and profession and career and status, he is not one by representation. How to break the San Francisco startup ecosystem? That's a good one. You know, I think actually one of the biggest problems that kind of humanity faces today, or I shouldn't say problem, but I would say missed opportunities, is that the entire tech industry in the Western world is inordinately concentrated in San Francisco. And that's a tragedy because really technology is a set of things that doesn't quite work yet. And it's the frontier that as we invent new technology, we move the human race forward, we move productivity forward, we tame nature, we are capable of doing things we weren't capable of doing before. So it's kind of sad that there's just one geographic region in the Western world which is responsible for most of the innovation and output in technology. And that has to change. And so, how do we change that? And I think the internet is going to change it. It's going to do it sort of naturally, but it's happening very slowly. The video tools, video conferencing tools are going to get better and better. Slack, things like Slack and chat has a big impact. We're going to see kind of a new generation of video conferencing tools coming up that I think are designed specifically for remote teams. I think we're also going to see a lot more remote matching, remote working tools. We're going to see websites that sort of do remote gig economy contracts. I think crypto will have a part to play here. In fact, crypto ICOs, even though they were full of scams and fraud and lots of junk, they were at least pointing to a way to do fundraising outside of Silicon Valley. So overall, I think I think that the next 20 years, breaking tech free from Silicon Valley is going to be a big deal. And I actually hope that I have some part to play in that. I think AngelList helped a little bit, especially with the talent jobs board side. And I think even with the fundraising side. But over time, I'd like to do more in that domain. I think the tech innovation and startups should be possible anywhere in the world. Of course, they'll always be easiest in Silicon Valley. But I don't think they should be restricted to Silicon Valley, because Silicon Valley, the golden goose is there, and so the local politicians and people, also just take it for granted. And frankly, long-term capital and innovation goes where it's most welcome. Oh, great. Someone got 2 jobs via AngelList, including working at Periscope. That's great. Someone says, I'm going to talk to a billionaire soon. How can I come across as a competent engineer? If you the great thing about engineering is it's a software engineering, I assume is what you're talking about. It's a very accountable profession. You don't have to talk. You can show. You can just go create something. You can code something up and then just show them your work. And I think that right there is better than talking about it. Sales is a job where you can sell yourself in an interview, and it helps because a good salesperson should also be able to sell themselves. But a lot of good engineers are actually really bad in interviews. So for engineers, design, product-oriented jobs, it's better just to show your output. But now, specifically, if you're talking to a billionaire, assuming that this is not one of those crony capitalist billionaires, this is someone who got there by doing something great from scratch, then they're going to be a risk taker and they're going to be a high initiative person. So what they're going to look for is what Keith Rabois, who's over at Coastal Ventures, calls barrels, not bullets. He's going to look for doers. He's going to look for people who are enthusiastic, people who lean in, people who basically say that they will or will take things from scratch with founder mentality and get them done, as opposed to someone who will wait for orders. I get like a large number of unsolicited emails from people basically saying, hey, I really want to work with you. It's kind of my life stream. Unfortunately, that's not enough. First of all, I'm retired, semi-retired. I don't really work with other people that much. But even if I were going to work with somebody, it wouldn't be because of their passion, unfortunately, because passion is in high supply. What's in short supply is passion and capability. So you have to be able to demonstrate your capabilities somehow. I want to see what have you done. What have you done on your own without being paid for it, without being pushed into it? What have you done for the sheer joy of it? What have you done for the passion of it? What have you created? And that's the only way that I have to sift through the noise, because otherwise there's too much noise. And for this billionaire person, it's probably going to be even a lot worse. So it's good to stand out by showing independent initiative, founder mentality in a shortcut. What have I done? I did this Periscope. How about you? Is it possible to stop socialism in the US? I'm kind of down on that, to be honest. I think that because, the way this country used to run was that money and media sort of used to control everything. Because there was a finite amount of media in shelf space, and you had to buy access in media, or you had to get in good with journalists who, frankly, like high status people. So you sort of needed their permission to get elected, especially in, things like the presidency. But now what's happened, thanks to the internet, we've got two contradictory things going on. Contradictory thing number one is that the internet is bypassing all of those old tools. So regular news media is being bypassed and people are going directly to social media. And then number two is crowdfunding is also bypassing sort of traditional money in politics. And ads are becoming more and more useless. So the combination of all of this means that basically the gates that used to keep the people at bay, that kept this as a republic rather than as a true democracy, are breaking down, and we're getting kind of a true democracy. And a democracy at the edges can degenerate into mob rule. So we're shifting from Republicans versus Democrats to nationalists versus socialists, both of which are very scary to me long term, because both of them are sort of a very populist, mob-driven mentality. If I had to pick one that I'm more scared of, it's definitely socialism, just because I've read enough history in the 20th century to see what that leads to. Because socialism eventually leads to the death of the American dream, and it leads to coercion, and it creates a slippery slide economically into ruin, which certainly I don't want to be around for. But I'm not that confident that anything can really be done about it. But I think what does happen is that we're moving to the age of the sovereign individual. And if you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it, even though it's almost 20 years old. It's very prophetic. And the thesis of the sovereign individual will seem obvious now, but 20 years ago it was a little harder, which is that eventually the most intelligent, most capable people in human society will be able to earn from anywhere. And nations are going to kind of have to bid for their presence. The U.S. had a monopoly on high-quality immigrants for the last couple of decades. Because if you were Indian or Chinese, and if you wanted to you were entrepreneurial, you believed in the American dream, you had to come to the U.S. There was no other country that was going to let you immigrate, no other country that was going to adopt you as a chosen citizen, accept you as an American, and then let you create and produce. But I think the U.S. is the bailouts, and so because of that, people now have a sense that the system is rigged, the system is unfair, and so now people are much more interested in how do we divide up the pie rather than how do we grow the pie. So, for example, the average American doesn't get benefit out of immigration anymore; they just get competition. So they don't want any more immigration, and then on the other side, you see people who are basically saying, well, the rich stole all of our money and all of our jobs, and of course it doesn't work that way. Wealth creation is a positive sum game. It's not a zero sum game. But yeah, no, parts of it are rigged. Parts of it are unfair. I totally agree. It's not a fair. But by the way, fair doesn't exist in the world, right? If you're going to obsess over fair, you'll never get anywhere in life. You just basically have to do the best you can with the cards you're dealt. But anyway, let's put that aside for a second. The bankers definitely have stolen a lot of money through the bank bailouts. There's no question about that. And we've wasted a lot of money on wars. So the combination means that we are sort of broke. We don't have the growth that we used to. Although recently we've had 3-4% growth, so it's been looking a little bit better. But even then, people now are trying to figure out how to divide up the pie. And I think that there are 3 very dangerous trends going on. One is kind of just general xenophobia. I'm not saying open borders or let illegal immigration in, but I think there is a place for skilled, tested, high-quality immigration with a pathway to citizenship. The classic kind that the U.S. has always had. Then secondly, I would say that, the second problem is, or the U.S. used to be a melting pot, or it still is, but if you listen too much to the media and you listen too much to Twitter, now it's all identity politics. It's all about how we're different rather than about how we're all the same. We're 99.9% the same with 0.001% differences, but now everybody wants to obsess about the differences. And that's the kind of stuff that leads to civil war. What made America great was that we melted into being American, that I could come here as Indian and I could end up as American. But now people are throwing away this idea of America, and that idea was really important. And then the last piece is just kind of this whole envy-driven reallocation of wealth, 1% arguments. There's macroeconomists who are really politicians, like Piketty, masquerading as data-driven scientists and Krugman, who are laying the intellectual framework and the academic framework for essentially the long, slow, slippery slide into socialism. And unfortunately, I do think that is where the country is headed. So I think smart individuals in the future will either not immigrate to the U.S. Because it's sort of more of a declining empire, and they'll stay in their home countries, or they'll basically become global citizens. But it's good for everybody. It's good for everybody to be to realize at this point in human history that you are no longer just a citizen of your nation. Wherever you live, whoever you are, you have one foot in the internet. And the internet is the real country, right? Like, you spend half your time on the internet, half your friends are on the internet, you get your information from the internet, you get your education from the internet. In the future, you get your work from the internet. There will come a day when you roll out of bed, you get your alert on your phone with a new gig for you, you sign up for it, you get paid in crypto, you do your work in VR, you work when you want, where you want, how you want, with who you want. And then you get paid, and then you move on to the next gig, or you take a vacation for a while. And a citizen like that, a person like that, is essentially a digitally free person. Now, they're physically not free because they still have to live in a real country, and they have to have a family and a tribe and people that they love and that they associate with, and even a culture. But I think that digitally we're going to become a lot more free. Another example. Another example. Well, someone's saying, isn't that true? Isn't that bullshit about the gig economy? Well, today the gig economy is kind of a low-end gig economy. It's like driving for Uber or delivering for Postmates. But I think we're going to see a much higher-end gig economy emerge. But for that, we still need better remote working communication tools. But I will say there's a lot of that going on right now. It's not digital slavery; it's digital freedom. To the Joshua Bowman who's looking down on everything. No, man, it's digital freedom. It's tools. Look, the internet is a tool. Tools are there for you to use or not to use. They're voluntary. Slavery is when there's a collar around your neck and someone tells you what you can and can't do. But freedom is when you can choose whether or not to use the tools. Tools are leverage. We are living, we're tool-making creatures, we're tool-making monkeys, and we're living in an age of incredible tools. The smartphone that we're all communicating with is the greatest tool ever invented. The computer, programming that thing, that's so powerful, that's so much free leverage. You should all be using it. Even if you're not an engineer, you should know a little bit about code, and you should be good with computers, facile with computers, because it will give you a superpower edge in any profession that you end up in, because you'll just be better at using the greatest tool invented by humans. Books that you recommend this year? This year just started, but in the last year, I actually spent a lot of it just reading philosophy, because last year was my yoga, meditation, chill out kind of year, where I was taking a break from the brutal work schedules that I used to run. And I just found myself naturally gravitating towards a philosophy phase. Some of the more interesting characters that I discovered, for those of you who are into self-examination, Anthony DeMello, who wrote a great book called Awareness. Another one was Rupert Spira. He's got a bunch of videos up on YouTube. I reread my Jed McKenna, which I'd read a long time ago, but very provocative character. Someone just said, I just started Ficciones. What's your favorite story? Ficciones is a collection of short stories by Jorge Luis Borges, who I discovered in college decades ago, and who is still my favorite literary sci-fi author of all time. He's a very unique character. Borges is definitely worth reading if you like highly dense science fiction-ish stories with lots of literary allusions and poetry and all kinds of clever prose weaved in. My favorite story of his is probably The Library of Babel, which is a classic. If you haven't read that and you like sci-fi, I highly recommend it. It's one of my two favorite short stories of all time. The other one is Understand by Ted Chiang, who's also a genius. Someone just said, I'm 21, I come from a poor family, I have an insane work ethic. Tell me how to get rich, Naval. Okay, let's do it. That's what I did my famous tweet storm about. It's pinned on my profile. You should go read it. Of course, every one of those tweets can be extrapolated into an hour's worth of conversation. But that's a good starting point. You kind of want to absorb all the different pieces, and whatever you don't understand, I can always extrapolate on much more. But I would say, the first thing that this person asked about how do I get rich, they said, I'm 21 and I have an insane work ethic. It's not really work ethic that matters. Unfortunately, there are people who bust their butts 80 hours a week, 120 hours a week, whatever the insane numbers are, and they don't get rich. So it's not really about hard work, right? You can work in a restaurant, 80 hours a week, and you're not going to get rich. So it's about knowing what to do and knowing who to do it with and when to do it. So it is much more about understanding than it is purely about hard work. Yes, hard work matters and you can't skimp on it, but it has to be directed in the right way. And if you don't know yet what you should be working on, then that is the most important thing to figure out. And you probably shouldn't be grinding at a lot of hard work until you figure out what you should be working on. I would say that the most important skill to getting rich is becoming a perpetual learner. Okay, you have to know how to learn anything you want to learn. There should be no book in the library that scares you, whether it's a math book or a physics book or an electrical engineering book or a sociology book or an economics book. You should be able to take any book down off the shelf and read it. And guess what? A number of them are going to be too difficult for you. that's okay. Read them anyway. Then go back and reread them and reread them. When you're reading a book and you're not understanding a lot of what it's saying, and there's a lot of confusion in your mind about it, that confusion is similar to the pain, the burn that you get in a gym when you're working out. But this time you're building mental muscles instead of building physical muscles. So just learn how to learn and read the hard books. And the problem with just giving advice saying just read is that there's so much junk out there, right? There's as many different kinds of authors as there are people. So there are lots and lots of people who are going to write lots of junk. So this is an unfortunate thing that I find. I do have people in my life that I consider to be very well read who aren't very smart. And the reason is because even though they're very well read, they sort of read the wrong things in the wrong order. It's not even that they read the wrong things, but they read them in the wrong order. Because if you start out reading a set of things that are false, or let's just say they're not even false, they're just weakly true at best, then they form the axioms that are the foundation for your worldview. And then when new things come in, you judge whether they're accurate or not based on that foundation that you've already built. So that foundation is critical. So when it comes to reading, I would make sure that your foundation is very, very high quality. And the best way to have a high quality foundation is, unfortunately, you may not love this answer, but it's to stick to science and to stick to the basics. It's better to be really great at arithmetic and geometry than to be like deep into advanced mathematics. Your foundations are very important. It's good to, like microeconomics, I would read microeconomics all day long, micro 101. I would throw macroeconomics away because it's trash. People can't agree on it. So generally, there's only a few things you can read where people don't really disagree. Like very few people will disagree that 2 + 2 is 4, right? So that's serious knowledge. That's knowledge everybody should have. So mathematics is a place where you can rest your head. It's a solid foundation. Similarly, the hard sciences are a solid foundation. Microeconomics is a solid foundation. The moment you start wandering out of these solid foundations, you're in trouble because now you don't know what's true and what's false. So I would focus as much as I could on the solid foundations. Another way to do this is to read the originals, read the classics. If you want to learn evolution, read Charles Darwin. Don't even read Richard Dawkins, even though I think he's great. Read him later. First read Charles Darwin. You want to learn macroeconomics, first read Adam Smith. Read von Mises, read Hayek. Start with the original. Start with the philosophers of the economy. Even if you're into communist or socialist ideals, which I'm personally not, but even if you are, start by reading Karl Marx. Don't read the current interpretation of whatever someone is feeding you about how things should be done and run. So if you start with the originals, with the foundations, then you will have enough of a worldview and understanding that you won't fear any book. And then you can just learn. And if you're a perpetual learning machine, you will never be out of options on how to make money because you can always see what's coming up in society, what the value is, where the demand is, and you can learn and come up to speed. There's an old model of making money, which is that the old model of making money is like you go to school, you study for 4 years, you get your degree, and then you work in that profession for 30 years. But things change too fast now. So now you have to come up to speed in a new profession within 9 months, and it's obsolete 4 years later. But within those 3 years that you're productive in that profession, you can get very wealthy. So it's much more important that you be able to become an expert in a brand new field within 9 to 12 months than it is that you studied the right thing a long time ago. All you really care about having studied before are the foundations so that you're not scared of any book. So if you go into a library and there's a book that you cannot read and you cannot understand, then you have to dig down and say, what is the foundation required for me to learn this? And I better go brush up on those foundations. Foundations are super important. I will bet you that I'm a little older now, so my brain doesn't work as fast as it used to. But in my prime, you could have come to me and we could have, for example, done math problems against each other, and I would have lost to you on every calculus problem. But it was a rare human being who could beat me at arithmetic. And basic arithmetic and numeracy is way more important than being able to do calculus in life. Similarly, being able to convey yourself simply using ordinary English words is far more important than being able to write poetry or having a very extensive vocabulary or knowing 7 different foreign languages. knowing how to just be persuasive when speaking. That sales skill is far more important than being an expert digital marketer and click optimizer on the internet. So foundations are key. It's just so much better to be a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 on foundations than to try and get super deep into things. Now, you do need to be deep in something because otherwise you'll be a mile wide and an inch deep and you won't get what you want out of life. But you can only achieve mastery in one or two things. It's usually the things that you're obsessed about at that time, and you have to sink a lot of time into it almost by definition. So you can't have mastery in everything. But if you have the foundations, then you can pick what you want to have mastery in, as opposed to just wish that or just have gotten lucky that you stumbled into it at the right time in your life early on. Question is, Naval, what is your meditation routine? So we're going to talk about meditation for a moment. Meditation is a tough, so if you guys could just stop the questions for a bit, I'm just going to talk about meditation. So let's all be meditative here for a moment. Thank you. I'm going to ignore questions for a while until I'm done talking about meditation. I'm literally going to stop looking at the screen while I talk about meditation, so you can stop typing for a little while. Okay, meditation. Meditation is a very complicated thing. It's every person you talk to who meditates will give you a different almost definition, different observation, different what it's good for, different how you do it. So what I'm telling you, and some people like Kapil, who's kind of my coach guy, hates it. Okay, he hates the whole concept of meditation. But I'm going to tell you my version. I'm going to tell you what I learned that worked for me. First, I'm going to back up a little bit, but there's a meditation master here. We're actually all meditation masters, so my meditation is no better than yours. I'm just telling you mine. So let's think about how your mind works. Okay, when you're walking down the street, your mind is usually associating. It's in free association. So it's basically saying, this woman just crossed the street with a dog. Oh, I used to have a dog just like that. Oh, when I had a dog like that, I lived in that apartment. Oh, that apartment, God, that guy overcharged me. Oh, I hated that guy. So your mind is always just free associating and connecting things around you and having sort of this uncontrollable stream of thoughts. That's like kind of like your default how your mind operates. Beyond that is contemplation. Contemplation is when you sit there and you direct your mind to one topic, to one subject. Scientists are essentially in contemplation. They're working on a specific problem. A poet, when they're like trying to figure out the right words for the poem, they're in contemplation. Sometimes an author can be in contemplation when they're plotting out the narrative for their book. Next, beyond that is concentration. Concentration is when your mind is focused on one thing. And this can be, you're surfing and you're riding a wave. You're driving a car at a high speed around a bend. It could be you're having sex with somebody. Your mind is focused on that act. So concentration is when your mind is single-pointed. Most meditation techniques are concentration methods. And there are many, many meditation techniques. If you ever want to run through a bunch of them, you can pick up a book called The Book of Secrets by Osho. And I know he's gotten a bad rap recently, but he was a pretty smart guy. But there's a book called The Book of Secrets by Osho, and it's actually a translation. It's a translation of an old, I believe, Sanskrit book that has something like 120 different meditations in it. And you can try each one. You can just see which one works for you. The one that works best for me is the fourth state of mind. So concentration, what you're trying to do, either with a mantra or watching your breath, is you're trying to bring your mind to what is called a single-pointed state. And then, once it is focused on this one object that is concentrating on, your mind is supposed to disappear. It's supposed to basically drop the mantra or drop the breath watching on its own without effort, and your mind is supposed to stop. And then you have a chance to see what you're really like underneath this anxiety-filled barrage of thoughts that you're always having. So the last thing that you're trying to get to, the last stage after association, contemplation, and concentration is meditation. Meditation is the art of doing nothing. You cannot do meditation. by definition, if you're doing something, you're not in meditation. Meditation is a state you're in when you're not doing anything, when you're not doing anything physically, when you're not doing anything mentally, when you're not doing anything consciously. You're just making no effort. You're literally being completely still, physically and mentally, inside and out. That is a state that you're trying to achieve. But there is an oxymoron, which is for true meditation, you're not even there. The thing that's trying to achieve the state of meditation cannot actually be there in full meditation. So the method that I learned was basically that you just sit there and you close your eyes, and for at least 1 hour a day, you surrender to whatever happens. You don't make any effort whatsoever. You make no effort for something. You make no effort against something. If something travels through your mind, then you let it go. If there are thoughts that are running through your mind, you let the thoughts run. What's kind of going on is that your entire life, things have been happening to you, some good, some bad, most of which you processed and resolved, but a few that stuck with you. And over time, they stuck more and more with you, and they almost became like these barnacles stuck to you. And you lost your childhood, sort of your childhood sense of wonder and being present and being happy. You lost your inner happiness because you built up this personality of unresolved pain and errors and fears and desires that have glommed onto you like a bunch of barnacles. And now how do you get those barnacles off of you? How do you strip them off of you? Well, what happens in meditation is when you're sitting there and not resisting your mind, these things will start bubbling up. It's like a giant inbox of unanswered emails, tens of thousands of emails going back to your childhood. And they will come out one by one, and you will be forced to deal with them. You will be forced to resolve them. And resolving them doesn't take any work. You just observe them. But now that you're an adult, now that you have some distance in time and space from previous events, you can sort of just resolve them. You can be much more objective about how you view them. Someone just mentioned peyote. Yes, that psychedelics are a bit of a cheat code in this, although I don't recommend drugs for anybody because I think you can do it all through pure meditation. If you wanted to accelerate ahead, psychedelics are good for that. There's a good book that Michael Pollan wrote recently called How to Change Your Mind, and I think that is a brilliant book that everybody should read. In any case, so with meditation, over time, you will resolve a lot of these deep-seated, unresolved things that you have in your mind, and it is different for everybody. And once they're resolved, there will come a day when you sit down in the morning to meditate, and I recommend morning 1 hour a day because anything less is not enough time to really get deep into it. But I would recommend, if you really want to try meditation, do 60 days, 1 hour a day, first thing in the morning. And if you sit there, do that, after about 60 days, you will sort of be tired of listening to your own mind. You will have resolved a lot of your issues, or you have to heard them enough that you'll have kind of seen through those fears and those issues. And what will happen is one morning, you're going to hit mental inbox zero. Okay, if you know the inbox zero concept, is when you open your email and there are no emails and it's zero email. And that is a pretty amazing feeling. Now, I don't want to describe this because it's kind of nonsense to use these descriptors for other people, but it's a state of somewhere between joy and bliss and peace. And once you have that, you don't want to give that up. If you can get a free hour of bliss every morning just by sitting and closing your eyes, that's worth its weight in gold. That will change your life. In terms of how to sit still for an hour, by the way, meditation isn't hard. All you have to do is sit there and do nothing. Just sit down, close your eyes and say, I'm just going to give myself a break for an hour. This is my hour off from life. This is the hour I'm not going to do anything. Yes, if thoughts come, thoughts will come. I'm not going to fight them. I'm not going to embrace them. I'm not going to think harder about them. I'm not going to reject them. I'm just going to sit here for an hour with my eyes closed, and I'm going to do nothing. How hard is that? Why can you not do anything for an hour? What's so hard about that? Just give yourself an hour break. That's it. The book I mentioned was Michael Pollan, Pollan. He's famous for being the New York Times, I think he was a New York Times journalist, and he wrote In Defense of Food and The Omnivore's Dilemma, and this is his most recent book. I actually don't recommend the apps. I love what the Headspace and Calm guys are doing, and I'm a big fan of them, but for what I just described, that method will not work with an app, because the app will clutter your mind with the instructions from the app. No music, no noise, no sound. Just sit in a quiet, dark place. Put your back against something. If it's the first thing in the morning, you're not going to fall back asleep, so it's okay to lean. You don't need any fancy postures or poses. You just need to sit down in such a way that you're comfortable. So put pillows underneath your knees, put big cushions underneath your butt, whatever it takes. Get super comfy because you don't want to move for the next hour. You just want to relax completely and do nothing. All you're doing is giving yourself 1 hour off. I think the apps are great training wheels, but at some point you got to learn how to ride the bike. Someone asked, can you talk about going through and resolving those thoughts? The thoughts resolve themselves. I know that sounds hard to believe, but you just kind of have to sit there with them, that's all. The reason they don't get resolved is because you're running away from them or because you're fighting them. If you sit there with something long enough, it will get resolved. Listen, all day long, there are things that bother us. And those things sit in front of us and annoy us until 10 minutes later they're gone and the next thing is bothering us. So when you sit with something long enough, it does go away. It's not like it stays there forever, but some things just take more time. But there's nothing to do other than just to let it be. Just let it come up, just watch it, let it be. How do you know you've hit inbox zero? Oh, you'll know. It's not subtle. When you hit inbox zero, then meditation arrives. And when meditation arrives, it's just a whole different beast. My drug of choice, honestly, these days is meditation. Somebody asked me my drug of choice is. I like red wine, I won't lie. And living in California, we've all tried cannabis here and there, but meditation is it. That's my main drug of choice. That's the one that I get high on every day. What is the noise behind you? It's a fireplace. Someone asked, does seeking inbox zero defeat the point of it? Yeah, in some very deep sense, yes. Like for true meditation, you can't have an objective, you can't be seeking anything. But I assume I'm talking to a general audience here, not to advanced practitioners. For a super advanced practitioner, you don't want to seek anything. But it is kind of contradictory. It's like, well, then why sit down and meditate in the first place? You can sound really clever by saying, there's no point to it, you're not supposed to do anything, and there's no reason to do it, nor should you seek it. But then you actually wouldn't do it, so it would defeat itself. You defeat yourself at the starting line. Did I read 12 Rules for Life? What was my take? I started to. I couldn't get through it, to be honest. I feel like it was very basic and it was meant for perhaps a younger person who was still looking for their moral foundation in the world. Do I think you should avoid salaried work? Let me switch gears for a second. If people could stop asking questions for a moment, and let's talk about different kinds of work. Okay, let's talk about how you make money in different kinds of work. And very few of us are lucky enough to start out with anything other than salaried work. We all start with salaried work. My first job was kind of in an illegal catering company in the back of a van delivering Indian food when I was 15. That was my first organized job. I had many jobs before that. I had paper routes. I washed dishes in the cafeterias. So I've done them all. I've done all those jobs, right? So I've done salaried jobs, and you have to start with shitty salaried jobs. You got to work your way up. What helped me work my way up was I just hated these jobs, so I wanted to do something better. I wanted to do something more intellectual. So I kind of earned my way up into better and better and bigger jobs. But it was only when I got to Silicon Valley that I got educated on the kind of the value of owning a business and getting out of a salaried job, right? And so that is super important. Like everybody should aspire to that. So let me see if I can come up with a good example, right? Like let's talk about the real estate business for a moment. It's like a very real, tangible business, right? So the worst kind of job is, you're someone who's like repairing a house. You're like a construction worker, right? So maybe you get paid $10, $15, $20 an hour, and you have to go to people's houses, and you have to go there at a specific time. You have to show up at 8 a.m. and your boss demands that you're there, and you kind of just repair little pieces of the house, right? So here you have zero leverage because it's just whatever you're doing with your own hands. You have some accountability, but not really. Your accountability is to your boss. It's not to the ultimate client. It's not to the owner of the house. And you don't have any real specific knowledge. The things that you're doing are, bare labor that almost anybody can do. So you're just not going to get paid a lot. You're getting paid minimum wage plus a little bit for your skill and your time, and depending on where you are, and that's kind of it. The next level up might be the contractor, right? The general contractor who's working on the house for the owner. That person may be getting paid, let's call it $50,000 to do the whole thing, and then they're paying the laborer $15 an hour, and they're keeping the difference. Okay, so that's obviously a better place to be, but how do we measure that? How do we know that's better? Well, we know it's better because this person has some accountability, right? They have some accountability because they're responsible for the outcome. So they have to sweat it at night if things aren't working right. And then they also have some leverage, and they have not a great formal leverage, but they have people working for them. That's the labor. And they have a little bit more specific knowledge, and that knowledge is how to organize a team and make people show up on time and how to deal with city regulations and those kinds of things, right? Well, the next level up from that might be a developer, right? Now, a developer is someone who is going to actually go and buy a crappy house, and then they're going to hire a bunch of contractors, and they're going to build that house, and they're probably going to take out a loan to buy the house. They probably don't even have the money themselves. They go to investors, they raise the money, then they buy the shell of a bad house, they tear down that house, they rebuild it, and then they sell it. Now, a good developer could make, instead of $50,000 like the general contractor, or $15 an hour like the laborer, the developer might be able to make $1 million or $500,000 in profit when they sell the house for more than they bought it for, including the expenses in the construction. But now notice what's required from the developer. Very high level of accountability, right? By the way, someone just asked me, Naval, already get taxed? Actually, no. Very simple answer to that is people like me are highly globally mobile. We leave. So what taxing capital does is it causes capital flight. Taxing entrepreneurs reduces entrepreneurs. The United States loss is somebody else's gift. So I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about my kids. I'm worried about the next generation who wants the American dream to stay alive. Anyway, going back to my example, the developer takes on more risk, more accountability, has more leverage, and needs to have more specific knowledge. They need to understand fundraising. They need to understand the ins and outs of city regulations. They need to understand where the real estate market is headed and whether they should take that risk on or not. So, that's a difficult one. And then the next level up from that might be someone who's running a fund on real estate. And that person has an enormous amount of capital leverage, and they're dealing with lots and lots of developers, and maybe they're buying huge amounts of houses in inventory. One level above that might be a company like Open Door that's writing code to buy inventory of and carrying a massive book of houses. So you see at each level how increasing leverage, increasing accountability, increasing specific knowledge, adding in money-based leverage on top of labor-based leverage, adding in code-based leverage on top of money and labor, allows you to actually create something bigger and bigger and get closer and closer to owning all the upside and not just being paid a salary. So generally, when you're working in life, yes, you start as a salaried employee, but you essentially want to work your way up this stack that I just talked about to try and get to higher and higher leverage, accountability, and specific knowledge. And the combination of those over a long enough period of time with the magic of compound interest will make you wealthy. Can this podcast go on YouTube? The Periscope? Some people actually turn them into YouTube videos and put them on YouTube, so feel free to do that. I don't have the time or the inclination. How do you work your way up? I mean, I hate to say it, but you just do really good work for a long time, and it is thankless until people recognize you. It's the nature of these things that nobody recognizes you for a long time, and then everybody recognizes you all at once. Like all the opportunities hit you at once. Someone mentioned Joe Rogan's podcast. Yeah, I mean, I would do Joe Rogan's podcast, but at this point, he reached out to me, and then I sent him a bunch of links, and then he went dark, so I assume I'm just low on his priority list because I'm not first of all, I'm not hustling to get the Joe Rogan podcast. It doesn't matter that much to me. It's only because my cousin wants me on there and he reached out. So now my ego is a little bit like, well, why doesn't he want me now on the Joe Rogan podcast? But the reality is, like, I could care less. I'm here talking to the people who want to listen. I'll have my own little media empire if I want it. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. I could just start tweeting again. I cut down on my tweeting heavily, but I could just start tweeting heavily again. I could do a couple of blog posts. I have a book in me. I have another huge tweet storm that I've been putting together. So I have no doubt that it could get all the reach that I want. And why share that with Joe Rogan? Why not just build it under my own media brand? What is interesting about these podcasts, though, is that it's conversational. It gives you someone else to talk to. It would be nice to have someone else intelligent and wide-ranging to talk to. So there's obviously value in that. I think one problem with me going on the Rogan podcast is that when someone like a Joe Rogan advertises his podcast, it's for like a specific thing. Like someone like Elon Musk, but someone else you'll say, oh, this is a professor of psychology who's studying blah, blah, blah. This is a person who's really into nutrition. This is like an MMA champion, right? So people have these very precise, very specific brands. And I don't have a precise, specific brand. I don't want a precise, specific brand. I'm a human like the rest of you. I want to be able to think about anything and talk about anything. And thinker is a shitty brand because everyone's a thinker. So it's just like another guy with opinions. So I can understand why Joe Rogan doesn't care about me on the podcast because he doesn't even know what to talk about with me. I don't even know what to talk about with me. My thoughts on why California is able to charge such a high tax rate. Well, interesting thing to note about California is California has a monopoly on all of the warm and dry coastline in the United States, which is the largest, richest country in the world. So that right there gives it enormous built-in natural resources. And before people start running around saying Florida, I said warm and dry. Show me warm, dry coastline in the United States. It's all in California, 100%. It's like, why is Saudi Arabia's government so messed up, but they still managed to get by? Because they're sitting on all this oil. Why did Venezuela manage to survive for this long being this messed up? Because it's got the largest oil reserves in the world. Natural resources, right? So the same natural resource powers California, except in California's case, a warm, dry coastline. And if you look at the politics of California, the politics of California basically boil down to the residents of California all saying, we got here first, newcomers stay out. So all the policies are designed to keep new people out, but everybody wants to go there because of the warm and dry coastline. And there's no need to create a tweet campaign to get me on Rogan. I don't want to harass him. First, I think it'll backfire. Because if I were him and someone's fans started like tweeting at me all the time incessantly, I would just get annoyed. So I think it would just backfire. I think I'll get on Rogan when I no longer get any value out of being on Rogan. I've kind of found that's how the universe works. So the day that I am truly indifferent about being on Rogan, and I'm like, it's like a 50-50, that's when he'll call. I'm pretty sure of that. I've just seen that that's just how the universe works over and over, and I can't prove it, but it's just a hunch. How do you regulate media consumption so it does not consume you? It's a great question, and I struggle with it. One of the big problems that I have right now that I'm facing is I have a serious Twitter addiction. I only broke it for 2 weeks in July when I disappeared off Twitter. But other than that, I have a serious Twitter addiction, and it's definitely costing me. I think I spend more time these days tweeting about reading than actually reading real books. And that's because I'm just really into Twitter. That's it. I've actually unfollowed a lot of the people I used to follow on Twitter. I've unfollowed a lot of tech industry Twitter. I've unfollowed a lot of crypto Twitter. I've unfollowed a lot of definitely outrage Twitter and political Twitter. And I've even unfollowed people who are smart and thoughtful but just have too much noise in their feeds. So my Twitter people that I follow, even like the 500 or something Twitter accounts I follow, a good number of them are muted. And many of them have their retweets turned off. So I am trying to focus on following either science or philosophy or nutrition or something that has value to me in my life. I tend to unfollow people who get outraged, who get emotional, who get triggered. And then a lot of people who reply to me in my comments, honestly, I block a lot of people. These days I block at the drop of a hat. I'm not like Nassim Taleb, but I'm probably blocking 2 or 3 people a day. If someone says something stupid, like outrageously stupid or insulting, then I just block them. I mute a lot of people. People say something dumb, but it was not ill intention, but it was just like very low quality and sort of just waste of time. I mute them, and this actually allows me to go through all my mentions. But I probably squander 30 minutes a day going through all my mentions, and that's a lot of time. I do need to learn how to back off of Twitter more. I need to get back more into books. It is a problem that I am facing as well. Humans are not designed to have the entire world's news thrown at them all the time. Even as a bookworm, I'm not meant to live inside the Library of Alexandria. It's too much. One has to. It's another one of those modern struggles, right? We all have to learn how to get over video games. We have to learn how to get over, TV. Luckily, that's one that I kicked a decade ago. I haven't watched a TV show in a year. Even then, it was just Game of Thrones with my wife and Rick and Morty, of course. That's the exception because it's so intelligent. But I don't watch movies and haven't for a long time. Video games, I go in and out, but mostly out. It's very rare that I play a video game these days. Only socially with friends and never alone. Twitter is a big remaining addiction. It's hard. We live in a culture of massive abundance. Someone said, I would love to see a conversation between Kapil Gupta and Sadhguru. I've actually met both of them, and I don't think they would get along. They're very, very different people. Someone asked about weed, cannabis. It's hard. If you're addicted to cannabis, and you want to get off of it, then I would suggest getting off of it, because I think like cannabis is probably the most harmless of the drugs out there, and it can help lessen anxiety, and there are some good medical benefits, but it's not a free lunch. There's no free lunches in life. With cannabis, I remember researching it a little bit a while back, and if you find any old paper on cannabis, old scientific paper, and we're talking like 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they're all incredibly negative. Like, it's the worst drug ever invented, blah blah blah. And then you get to the 90s and the 2000s, and they're kind of like positive. And after 2000, they're all incredibly positive. No one can say anything negative about cannabis. But cannabis is sort of this, the cannabis that is being sold today, at least in the states where it's legal, is not the cannabis that you might have grown up on. This is not 3, 4, 5% THC. It's 25% THC. So it can be the unintended consequences of this stuff. I don't think we quite know yet. At the very least, I guarantee you that if you're a regular cannabis smoker, it will rob you of your motivation. You're just too happy. Life is just too easy. If I had discovered cannabis when I was 16, I probably would not have had a good wealth or career outcome. And I may not have gotten some of the other things that I want in life. Exactly. Someone said, why do you think they call it dope? Yeah, it's dope because it makes you dopey. So you kind of do want to get off of it. And I actually think meditation is a great way to get off of it. Once you get to a good place in meditation, it's better than what you get out of cannabis, and without many of the downsides. So that is the way that I would use to get out, but it's not easy. It'll take you, like I said, at least 60 hours of an hour a day every morning. That's the minimum. What is the purpose of life, Naval? Everyone has to have their own answer to this question. So my answer is not necessarily correct. It's just valid for me. It's not valid for you. So what's interesting is more to explore the question than to try and come up with an answer to the question. Kapil Gupta and I've talked quite a bit about this, and the conclusion that I've sort of come to for myself is I'm not answering your question directly, I'm answering a little indirectly, is when I try to think about what I want to do these days with my life, and I'll be the first to admit that I have a luxury that the rest of you don't, or many of you don't, which is I have money. So I have a lot more options open to me. But I like to think that I would have still thought this way even if I didn't have money. Which is, when I think about what I should do with my life, I kind of realize that none of it is going to matter in the end. In fact, one good mental construct, if everyone could stop with the questions for a sec, one good mental construct is that I think that everything I do in my life is going to be a failure. Everything I do is going to be a failure. And I'm being deliberately provocative because I'm trying to catch your attention to deeply think about this. The reason everything I do is going to be a failure is, one is on the material level, on the physical level, I'm going to die. And when I die, I won't care. I've been under general anesthesia. There was life before. What was life like before I was born? I just didn't care. In those situations, you don't care. So when you die, you don't care about anything anymore. So in that sense, everything you've accomplished, you don't take anything with you. It's a failure. There's a second sense in which it's all guaranteed to fail, which is, even if you believe in ideas and memes and progeny and legacy, well, eventually the Earth will fade away. And after that, the solar system will fade away. And after that, the galaxy will fade away. And then the universe will end. So nothing is forever. Nothing is permanent. So everything goes to zero eventually. So there's that sense of failure. And there's a third way of realizing that everything you do is destined to fail, which is just look at your own experience. Every time you do anything and you succeed, you're really happy about it. And then a year later, you're back to where you started. Sometimes even a day later, but best case a year later, you're mentally back to where you started. The same way, if you fail to do something or something goes poorly for you, you're miserable and unhappy, but within a few months or a year, you're back to your previous state mentally. So even when you succeed, you bank that success right away and you essentially fail. So everything I do in my life is guaranteed to fail. So now what should I do with my life? And the answer is only what I really want to do for its own sake. And that's the definition of art. So whether it's business, whether it's exercise, whether it's romance, whether it's friendship, whatever you're doing, I think the meaning of life is to do it for its own sake. It's to just do it because you love living it. There is no meaning beyond that. And ironically, when you do things for their own sake, that's when you create your best work. That's when it's art. That's when it's, that's when you create that's when you're gonna do your finest work. And so even if you're trying to make money, you'll actually be the most successful. The year in which I sort of generated the most wealth for myself, even though it hasn't paid out yet, I can tell just in terms of I accomplished the most, I created the most value on an economic basis, was actually also the year in which I worked the least hard. But it was the year in which I cared the least about the future. It's where I was mostly just doing things for the sheer fun of it, where I was basically telling people I'm retired, I'm not working, and then I had the time to put into whatever was highest value in front of me, and by doing it for its own sake, I did it at its best. So I don't know if that answers your questions about meaning of life, but that is one way in which I think about it. There are other frames that I use. There's probably about 10 different frames that I'm using at all times to think about my life, but that is a recent and powerful one. What's your best parenting advice? I am a recent parent. I don't read the parenting books, although there's one that I do recommend. It's called Summerhill. Anthony DeMello recommends it. It's kind of a mind blower. It's about what happens when you treat kids who are supposedly damaged as if they're adults. I'll give a couple of off-the-cuff thoughts about parenting. These are in the armchair academic section of what I'm going to say, because many of you have far more experience parenting than I do. But I'll make a few observations. One is, I think schools are not for the smart kids, right? Schools are for the average kids. Schools are all about averages. We live in an industrial education system where you're trying to get you're moving at the pace of the average, and mobs just aren't very smart. Groups just aren't very smart. And it's fine. We need schools, we need daycare, we need to educate the average person. But if you want to raise a really smart child, school is no place for this to raise a smart child. What schools do, and this was a tweet somebody put out in my Twitter feed, and I did retweet it, I just forget who it was. They said, schools replace curiosity with compliance. 5 words. I love that because it's so short, just 5 words. Schools replace curiosity with compliance. And I think that is so right. When I think back to my own education, so much of it was sit down, shut up, raise your hand when you have to go to the bathroom. No, you must memorize this even though it doesn't make sense to you right now, etc. So I think with children, you just have to feed their curiosity. All the really smart kids that I know are essentially autodidacts. They're self-learners. And you cannot force a child to be a self-learner. All you can do is, feed their curiosity. So if they, for example, want to, if your kid wants to pick up the guitar, get him a guitar. If they put it down, let them put it down. If they want to go to soccer class, send them to soccer class. If they don't want to play soccer, don't force them to play soccer. By the way, someone just said, I blocked them today on Twitter. Yeah, sorry. I mean, look, keep in mind, I'm looking at 500 mentions a day. So many of them are about raging, attacking, stupidity. Some of them are very serious. And I have to get through these on a timely basis. And if I don't block people who are sort of snarky or outraged, then I wouldn't even be able to make it through my mentions because I just have too many of those. So I do block at a whim. I don't have time to go and investigate every single detail, but I'll try to go back in and unblock you. I gotta go back in and dig and figure it out, but no promises, unfortunately. It's just the nature of Twitter. Twitter is not conducive to high quality, good conversation, right? And I get what it's good for. Twitter is great for discovery. It is a beautiful platform for discovering people and then having very short communication with them. But there's no nuance in Twitter. Who was it that I blocked? Ben Cohen TDB. Okay, I'll try to remember. Sorry, Ben. I have a kid with ADHD. Do you believe in drugs? I don't know. I'm not a medical professional, but it just seems weird to me that everybody supposedly has ADHD now when they didn't have it a few decades ago. And I'm pretty sure I would have been diagnosed with ADHD if that diagnosis had been a thing when I was a kid. I just think the bar for drugging your child should be really, really, really high. If they can sit in front of a video game, for example, and play a video game uninterrupted for 2 hours, they don't have ADHD. They're just bored of the other thing. Be very careful, drugging someone on a regular basis, especially when their brain is forming. Do I believe almost nobody should be on antidepressants? That's a really tough question. I don't know, honestly. If someone's smoking dope, isn't that an antidepressant? Maybe if I'm meditating, isn't that an antidepressant? Look, if there was a free lunch antidepressant where there was absolutely no downside, I would say go do it. But I think they all have some downsides. So it's always better to go au natural if you can. But if it's something that you need in the short term as a bridge, that's fine. Nobody's perfect. You can use it as a bridge. But maybe think about it as a bridge rather than as a way of life. I think what you want to stay away from is sort of this permanent victimhood mentality where I'm broken, my brain is broken, I have a chemical imbalance, and I just need antidepressants all the time. Yeah, you might be that rare individual, but if you're not, then, for example, if you read Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind, he pretty convincingly shows that 1 or 2 mushroom trips are way better for you than a lifetime of antidepressants and will get you the same results. What are the downsides of meditation as an antidepressant? The downsides of meditation are A, it takes a lot of time. B, it's really hard, at first. Even though you're supposed to do nothing, doing nothing is hard for us because we're such a productivity-driven culture and species. Another downside is meditation can rob you of some of your classic motivation. But it won't be robbing you. It'll be more because you'll see through your previous motivations. You'll sort of understand that, those were not genuine, those were envy-driven, or those were mimicked. Those were not intrinsic to me. Also, meditation, like anything else, can become its own little game with levels and ranks and spiritual badges and trophies and leveling up. Real meditation does not have to be taught and does not have to be learned, because it is the birthright of every living creature. It's already there with you all the time. You're actually in deep meditation all the time. It's just covered up by all the noise and all the thoughts and all the unresolved issues and all the emotions that are running through you. If you could just turn off that monkey mind, then what remains is meditation. It's always there underneath. The parenting book that I mentioned, it's not really a parenting book. It's more a story about a school, a real school in the 1930s in England, where they used to send very troubled children, and they're kind of how they used to turn them around. The book is called Summerhill. Why did I retweet Mike Pence? I thought you don't do politics. Yeah, I try not to do politics, but there are two things that I'm very passionate about, and I would summarize that as free minds and free markets. So when people get into censorship and freedom of speech issues, I do get pretty passionate, because I don't like people telling me how to think, because I like being a free person. And then also about free markets, when people sort of attack markets and sort of, socialism, for example, is when I get fired up. The reason I retweeted Mike Pence was because I think what's happened in Venezuela is an absolute tragedy. It's really sad, the human cost of what's going on there. So I was happy to see the United States supporting, moving Maduro aside. And yeah, look, I'm not an enlightened person. If I was enlightened, I probably wouldn't care. And you'll know the day I stop tweeting anything about that stuff, then I'm there. But until then, forgive me my little indulgences. You can always turn off my retweets. Somebody told me today they unfollowed me because I retweeted some political stuff. I would say that, look, first, it's a lot less than most people. Second is I'm still a human animal. So even when I tweet about how politics are awful, a lot of that is just reminding myself that politics are awful. The easiest way to get out of that is just turn off retweets, because I don't directly talk about politics. I just retweet stuff. Did your motivation to earn money drop when you hit financial independence? Yes and no. It did, in the sense that the desperation was gone. But if anything, it's now more art. My art is I create businesses. I can create a new business within 3 months and raise the money and assemble a team and get it launched. And it's fun for me. It's really cool to see what can I put together. And it makes money as a side effect, because that's the game that I became good at. So it's just my motivation has shifted from being goal-oriented to being artistic. So ironically, I think I'm much better at it now. What was your figure where you thought, now I'm financially safe? The problem is that money is not the root of all evil. There's nothing evil about it. But the lust for money is bad. And it's not bad in a social sense. It's not bad in the sense of like you're a bad person to others for lusting for money. It's bad for you. And the reason it's bad for you is because it's a bottomless pit. It will always occupy your mind. So to make money, you have to love money. And if you love money and you make it, there's never enough. There is never enough, because that desire, when it's turned on, doesn't turn off at some number. It's a fallacy to think that it turns off at some number. And so it's punishment. The punishment of the love of money is delivered at the same time as the money. As you make the money, you just want even more, and you become paranoid and fearful of losing what you do have. So there's no free lunch. You make money to solve your money and material problems. And I think the best way to stay away from this constant love of money is to not upgrade your lifestyle as you make money. So it's very easy to easily keep upgrading your lifestyle as you make money. But if you hold your lifestyle fixed and hopefully make your money in giant lump sums, as opposed to a trickle at a time, you won't have time to upgrade your lifestyle, and then you may get so far ahead that you may actually be financially free. Another thing that helps is, for me, I value freedom above everything else, and it's all kinds of freedoms to do what I want, freedom from not wanting to do what I don't want to do, freedom, yeah, and freedom from my own reactions and emotions and things that may disturb my peace. So for me, freedom is my number one value, which overrides even money. So to the extent that money buys me freedom, it's great. But to the extent that it makes me less free, which it definitely does do at some levels as well, I don't like it. Is Jeff Bezos a superhuman primate? I would guess he's doing human growth hormone or testosterone replacement therapy or something. At his age, you don't lean out and bulk up like that for free. I hope he knows what he's doing. That's just a guess. Someone just mentioned Richard Hamming, You and Your Research. Beautiful essay. I highly recommend reading it. It's ostensibly written for people who are in scientific research, but I think it applies across the board. It's just a great old timer essay on, how to do great work. It reminds me of a lot of stuff that Richard Feynman used to say, although I think Richard Hamming put it more eloquently than almost anywhere else I've seen. Does everyone need to learn how to code? I don't think you need to learn how to code and be good at it. I think that you just need to learn enough so that you're not scared of computers. So that you don't, and if you sit in front of a computer and open a terminal window or some program crashes, you're not like, wow, this is some mysterious black box object. I don't quite understand how it works. It's good to understand how it works because then you can just use it better. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, it's the most powerful tool ever invented by humanity. So knowing how to use it will give you leverage like nothing else. Even if you never need to use a computer in your job, let's say that let's just say you're in some other profession, eventually you want to get the word out. You want to talk to people. So whether you want to use Periscope or Twitter, knowing computers will actually teach you and let you know even how to spread your message. You'll be a better user of Periscope. You'll be a better user of Twitter. Yeah, by the way, my incompetence with the microphones notwithstanding, believe it or not, I am actually pretty good at computers. To what extent is Silicon Valley in bed with big government? Are you spying on all of us? I actually don't think Silicon Valley is in bed with big government. I think we have two different surveillance systems in this country, and we're about to add a third. The first surveillance system is the NSA, who in violation of, I believe it's the Fourth Amendment, is listening to everybody. So that's terrible. That's panopticon, headed towards a police state. It's just one tyrant away from a complete slide into a dictatorship, so it's awful. The second surveillance state that we live in is Facebook, Twitter, Google, Amazon, etc., and a zillion little tech startups. They're all gathering data on you also. This is less malicious in the sense that they're not going to like burst down in your door at night with a death squad and execute you, as governments can do, but they still have way too much data on you. And they're bad at storing it. So I have no doubt that the NSA is getting access to most of their data. So that's the unfortunate part, because these guys are gathering huge amounts of data. And then maybe the NSA or maybe even the Chinese Secret Service or North Korean hackers or who knows, it just kind of creates these honeypots for people to attack. And then they also deliberately introduce bugs in our software, which makes it insecure, which makes us more vulnerable to hackers. There's all kinds of issues. And then, yes, in the Facebooks of the world are using it to ad target you, but, I use ad blockers and I use Brave, so I don't care as much. The third kind of surveillance that we're going to have to worry about is social surveillance. And that's surveillance, S-O-U-S, the French word. I think it means us, like us-valence, surveillance. And surveillance may actually be the worst kind. If you look on Twitter, what's going on today, it's social surveillance. Every word you say is being watched by a small number of highly easily offended, outraged people who are waiting to get triggered about something you say and then attack you, spam you, troll you, deplatform you, threaten you, dox you, what have you. That's just going to get worse. And one place where that's going to get worse the court of public opinion, the mob, the witch hunts. The place where that's going to get worse is in physical reality. Full facial recognition is coming. Facial recognition software has gotten really, really, really good. The only reason it's not out there en masse right now in the United States is just because a few little things haven't come together. But I would be surprised if it doesn't happen within the next 2 years in a big way, where you basically have the tools at your disposal to track and recognize everybody walking down the street and get their backgrounds and histories and all that stuff. And then you're not just being spied on like you are today on Twitter, you're being spied on everywhere. And yes, it's happening in China, government run, but we're going to have our own, democratic, at best, mob-based at worst version. Someone asked about Howard Schultz. He doesn't have a chance. He's an elite candidate. We're only talking, nationalists versus socialists from here on out. No more elites. Lambda school model. I think it's great. I think there should be Lambda schools for every discipline. I love what they're doing. I wish I'd invested. I didn't know them as an investor type. I just read about them. How concerned am I about the danger of a U.S. civil war in the next decade? It's not as far-fetched as people think. I don't think it's a full-blown civil war, but I think we'll see secession movements. It's getting ugly out there. Nassim Taleb's model of the most intolerant minority controlling the discourse is correct, unfortunately, and the extremists are controlling the discourse right now. What I'm kind of surprised about is how, the coastal elites and the left wing kind of want to pick a fight with the other half of the country that's armed to the teeth. If I was the unarmed half, I'd be a little quieter. Trump is not an elite. If you think Trump is an elite, then you don't understand what Trump is. I would suggest keeping an open mind about it and really researching his positions and policies and how he talks. There's a reason why he was feeding people fast food, and elites don't feed people fast food. Elites look down on fast food. An elite, it's hard to define elite properly. I don't even think that's a good question, though. One should have a rigorous definition rather than throwing words around. But I would generally say it's white collar, college educated, relatively well off, kinds of people who read the New Yorker and the New York Times. They look down on blue collar people. They look down at anyone who doesn't have a college degree from like a high end university. I think the easiest dividing line between elites and non-elites is degrees from known high-quality universities. If you had a magic wand, how would you go about depolarizing our current political climate? I would just reinforce the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, freedom of association. I would crack down on identity politics. I would probably try and make certain changes that Sorry, I take that all back. I don't want to talk politics. This is awful. I hate politics. Don't get me pulled into politics. It's terrible. I could already feel my brain starting to work in 10 different directions when I started talking politics. None of them good. Is coding the blue-collar job of the 21st century? No, coding will never be a blue-collar job. That is a common misconception amongst non-technical people. And even a few technical people make this mistake, but real coders don't. Coding will never be automated. The day that coding is automated, the artificial general intelligence has arrived, Terminator is here, and life on this planet as we know it is over. Coding is just thinking. It's thinking in a logical and structured way that you then use to program a robot or a computer. And so just as some people are good at thinking and some people are not, or some people are better at thinking certain kinds of thoughts than others, there will always be massive variation between coders. All that can happen is we can build tools to make coding easier and let the coders then move up to the next level of the stack with better tool sets rather than stay at the lower levels of the stack. Coding will never be a so-called blue-collar job. I don't love the blue collar, white collar distinction. Like I said, that's mostly about college education. And actually, some of the best coders I know are self-taught. In fact, many of the best coders I know are self-taught. They didn't go to college for it. So it's not necessarily a blue collar versus white collar thing. But you cannot go wrong having coding knowledge. It will increase your value in every major endeavor in your life. Where does comedy go from here? I think comedy is our best defense against people who are trying to control speech. Comedians are, first in the firing line and being shot. Even back in medieval courts, right, the jester was around because the jester was the one person who could tell the truth. Comedians are the ones who can say what everybody else is thinking but is too afraid to say. So if when they start shooting the comedians, they're serious. Who is my favorite living thinker? That's a tough one. I don't try not to have favorites. Take what you can from here and there. One person that does come to mind is Nassim Taleb. I know that he's very acerbic. He's very hard to swallow sometimes, but he is brilliant. He knows his stuff inside out. He thinks very non-linearly, pardon the pun. He's made original, significant contributions. I think people will be poring over his work for hundreds of years. He's also got great books of aphorisms. He's funny. He's rude. He's tough. He really does put skin in the game. I wouldn't want to tangle with him, but he's definitely up there. Nick Szabo is also another polymath kind of genius that I like reading and listening to. Ray Dalio's The Principles. I think it was really good, but then after about 10 pages, I lost the plot. He should just write the shorter version. I'd love to see the version that would have been written by Ray Dalio, the pauper, rather than Ray Dalio, the billionaire. Is Elon Musk the real deal? I think so. But I don't have insider information, but I think so. Look, at the very least, every time one of those rockets launches and a whole bunch of kids watch it, they get inspired for doing something big. It's children need that. I really respect that he's actually trying to save the world. I mean, wow. Elon Musk is the one guy I look at and I'm like, maybe I'm not doing enough with my life. Thoughts on universal basic income? I actually don't think it's a great idea. I think it's a slippery slide to socialism once the bottom 51% finds out they can vote themselves everything for the top 49%, and then you kind of just end up with everybody being poor. I think UBI is bad. I think it's better to create meaningful jobs for people, give them unlimited education, give them healthcare, give them benefits, but straight up cash transfers. I think you're robbing people of meaning and motivation, and then you're really setting up a zero-sum game where everyone gets focused on dividing up the pie. I would rather take the same exact amount of money and figure out how to help people, do meaningful work and create meaningful businesses and get meaningful educations. Will Amazon be dreamed a monopoly and broken up? It's interesting. Ben Thompson has written a lot about the new aggregators, which are essentially these modern demand-driven monopolies as opposed to supply-side monopolies. The old monopolies used to monopolize supply. So Rockefeller had all the oil, Carnegie had all the steel, and so they could charge high prices. But that's not how the new monopolies work. The new monopolies are aggregators. They actually get all the demand. So all the users go to Amazon, all the users go to Facebook, all the users go to Twitter. And then they squeeze the suppliers in the back end and they deliver very low prices or zero prices to the consumers. So where's the harm? there's no high prices. The harm is in the supplier side. The harm is in there's less competition. The harm is in a single voice controlling all voices. So these modern monopolies are much, much harder to identify, let alone to regulate. So I just don't know how you would break up an Amazon. You could separate AWS from their core business, but that doesn't affect anything. Then you just have two monopolies. Maybe on the Facebook and Twitter side, you can force them to open up data sharing graph or protocol or APIs. Amazon, I just don't see how you can break it up without destroying all the consumer convenience. You would literally destroy, tons of value. In any case, these companies are not going to be destroyed by the U.S. government. Although the Elizabeth Warrens of the world coming into power may be a different story. I think she's very pro-regulation of tech companies, and so is AOC. They're heavy pro-regulators, and they'll probably be the most fearsome enemies the tech companies have faced in a while. But the bigger issue is going to come from the Europeans. It's going to come from startups, and maybe someday from blockchain-based decentralization. Blockchain decentralization is still far off, though. Outside of California, where would you live? I like Austin. I think Austin, Texas is a great town. New York was my hometown. I've outgrown it a little bit. Like I said, California has this monopoly on all the warm, dry coastline in the United States. So they've just got they've got the natural resources, and everything else follows from there. I've never been to Nashville, for the person who mentioned Nashville. I should check it out. Do I think India is a good place to start a tech company? Probably. I'm not on the ground in India, so I don't know what the local regulations are like, but the talent pool is definitely there. They're English speaking, so that's a huge bonus. You've got a large market, so that's another huge bonus. The problem is, of course, is the country's poor, the telecommunications infrastructure is not great, and the government, tends to be very controlling. But if the cards line up, India could be the next China, or even bigger. Again, because India is English speaking, and because the democracy, unlike China, it's not going to wall itself off from the rest of the world, both in language or in internet. So a properly run, managed, growing India modernizing would probably have a much bigger impact in the world than even China did, crazily enough. And it'll do great things for the environment, because the environment in India is terrible. And once Indians get rich and they start caring about their environment, then it'll be a different story. Have to sell everything you own and buy one asset and hold for 20 years. What is it you buy? Okay, this is not investment advice, but I would buy Bitcoin. If I could only hold one asset, that would be it. I should follow my own advice. How is your diet these days? I wish it was better. I'm on the paleo diet, paleo, but I fail a lot. I try a little bit of intermittent fasting also. I should do more of that. Today I just had dinner. I didn't have breakfast or lunch. I do own Bitcoin, but it's through funds and it's not enough. The problem is I'm too high profile to hold my own Bitcoin. So historically I've gone through funds, but in the future I think I'm going to start buying some and storing it with Anchorage, which is a company I invested in that I think has rock solid custody. And they just launched, so also the prices are lower these days. Don't buy Bitcoin just because I said so, please. You'll probably lose all your money. What's my motivation to do this Periscope? I'm bored. Same as you. Why are you here? How do you practically go about destroying the self? That would be 3 hours of conversation minimum. I'd go listen to Kapil Gupta or read what he's writing. he has one path towards it. It's his path, but it's very inspirational to see him on it. I think his path is via negativa, right? It's sort of removing everything, disenchantment with the world, realization, seeing, understanding that the world has nothing to offer. That's his path to destroying the self. Ramana Maharishi, did it through Who Am I? There are people who have done it by, asking what is true. There are people who have done it because their life has just been so terrible that they've had no choice. But I think there are probably as many paths as there are people. Do I still have my inner voice? I do. It's here. It's right here, unfortunately and fortunately. I mean, you need it. It's natural. It's part of you. But it just shouldn't run the show. Do I think intelligent people should have more kids? I think everybody should have kids. Kids are great. Kids are you're here because an unbroken chain of your ancestors, from tadpoles all the way till now, replicate. Are you going to be the first one to miss that branch? I mean, don't do it. Your genes will hate you. Advice for people in their 20s. The 20s are fabulous. You have energy, you have independence. The world is kind of your oyster. I read this really good piece of advice on Twitter that stuck with me, and frankly, this is why I stay on Twitter, to learn things like this that I can easily remember, which said, pick 3 hobbies. One that makes you money, one that keeps you fit, and one that keeps you creative. The beauty of that is, if these are hobbies, then you'll kind of hit these major things in your life, and you'll do them while loving all the moments that you're doing it. And you can substitute those 3 with whatever you want. So it doesn't have to be about money. It doesn't have to be about physical fitness. It doesn't have to be about creativity. Although I think those are 3 good starting points. That's just how the original tweet was phrased. But if you want to, if there's something in your life that is non-negotiable, that you want it to be true with you for the rest of your life, then find a hobby that will get you there. My creative hobby, it's funny you asked that. It's actually Twitter. Advice for people in their 40s? Yeah, that's actually a better question. Everyone has advice for people in their 20s. So let's explore that question for a second. Why do we have advice for people in their 20s, but not for people in their 40s? I think it's because we assume, somewhat rightly, that people in their 40s are fixed. They can't change. They are incapable of change, and part of that is physical, part of that is circumstantial. So my advice to people in their 40s would be to try and figure out how to change your life so that advice for people in their 20s applies to you. Basically what that means is you have to get physically fit enough that you still see the future, you can still make changes and do things, and that you keep learning like a young person, so your brain stays agile and you're not afraid of taking on new topics and new disciplines. Easier said than done. I know, of course, in your 40s you have many responsibilities, but in some way, some of that is mental. So at least the part that's mental, learn how to get rid of it. What is that noise? It's a fire. I believe it's a fireplace. If everyone will wait 1 minute, I'm going to go turn it off and see if that helps. All right, hopefully that's better. Is Silicon Valley actually full of wolves, psychopaths, and sociopaths, as the media says? No, it's not. It's easy to pick on people, I would say the Silicon Valley is no more full of psychopaths and sociopaths than the media is full of psychopaths and sociopaths. It's just the in-group, out-group thing. What's actually going on is, I'm not offering an opinion on this, but the media is dying. The mass media is dying. The classic mass media is dying. And it's dying for a number of reasons. The first reason it was dying has nothing to do with the current social media companies. It was Craigslist. Craigslist blew up the classified advertising model for newspapers. Then CNN blew up the nightly news, and once you had CNN, you didn't tune into NBC anymore, and now you needed 24-hour news networks, and 24-hour news networks need to generate content 24 hours at a time, so they switched to being these opinion networks and analysis networks, and at that point they lost their credibility because they lost their objectivity. Not that media was ever fully objective, but at least it was made a pretense at objectivity. They tried to show both sides. But now I think we have, media getting blown up by Craigslist, by kind of this opinion cycle that they've gotten into because of 24-hour news, and then the last piece is the internet itself, with the way the internet puts all news in competition with each other all at once, and then of course social media, where everyone's a reporter, everyone's a journalist. So the media's business model is going away, and they hate it. Obviously, it's an entire industry is being eliminated, and yeah, there will be some survivors. There will be New York Times and anyone who can aggregate a lot of users, which is just a few outlets, and there will be a few that are very partisan and emotionally driven, but essentially the media is dying, and they're currently going through the blame game, and the current one to blame is Silicon Valley. So they're attacking Silicon Valley. They hate everything Silicon Valley does. But hey, Silicon Valley also disrupted Hollywood. It also will disrupt Wall Street. And it's tech. It's not even Silicon Valley, it's tech. So the media is not happy about that. By the way, I don't understand what the noise is. People are saying there's a noise. I don't hear a noise, so I'm sorry if there's a noise. Are banks dying too? Banks would be dead already if they weren't protected by regulations. But the same financial regulations that supposedly keep the banks in check keep the startups out. That's the problem with regulations. Every time we demand regulations, what we actually do is we freeze the incumbents in place. It's like, look at the scooter companies, right? When the scooter business first started out, everyone said, well, these are going to be great businesses because there's a barrier to entry in that, we have these exclusive scooters. That turned out not to be the case. China just dumped scooters on every provider. So then it was like, the barrier to entry is we have the charger network and the mechanics. Well, that's not a barrier. Now everyone has chargers and mechanics. So now what they're hoping for is that the barrier to entry will be regulations, that they'll have a small number of licenses that nobody else has. So regulators, although they come in to prevent the excesses and the bad behavior of the current companies, they prevent new companies from coming in, and they freeze the industry in place. So banks survive because of regulators. That's the irony. Oh, the noise is gone. So maybe it was the fireplace. That's weird. It wasn't that noisy to me here. Sorry about that. Will I be doing this live regularly? It's I run out of material. I'm just gonna be repeating myself. It's like that Farnham Street podcast that I did in 2017. That one went super viral and people liked it a lot. I'm not 100% sure why. I have some theories, but I'm not really sure. And I haven't been back on since, even though Shane was kind enough to invite me, because that's a hard act to follow. It's better to go at the top. It's the Matrix Reloaded problem. They should have stopped the Matrix trilogy after the first movie, but because they had to make 2 more, it went from great to terrible. Are software engineers underpaid in general? No, but the problem is because software engineering is such a creative task, it is highly nonlinear output. A not very good engineer is worthless compared to a great engineer who's worth maybe 100 other engineers. So when you pay on the average, the problem is, by definition, most are overpaid and a few are underpaid, but you can't tell which ones. But I think in general, like the industry is catching up. I mean, today in Silicon Valley, if you're a fresh graduate even, and you're going to a Google or a Facebook in engineering, you're probably making, I would guess, this is a guess, but I would guess you're making about $300,000 to $500,000 per year once your total package with benefits and everything and equity is taken into account. Now that may sound insanely high, but keep in mind Silicon Valley is also the most expensive place to live in North America. Thoughts on attending college? Yeah, just learn something that you can't learn on your own. Like, for example, if you're in a biology lab or in your computer science or mathematics, those things are hard to pick up on your own. But when I got into college, I originally, I wanted to be a physics. Physics was really hard. My math wasn't good enough. Then I switched to English and history, where I was doing great. I was getting straight 4.0s, and it was easy, and it was easy straight. But I realized that is something I could have done on my own. There's no need to get an Ivy League education just for English and history. So I switched to computer science and economics, and at least the computer science part I think would have been harder to learn outside of college. Economics I could have learned on my own. I didn't need college for that. So I would say if you're going to college, if you're spending the money, if you're spending the time, that's a very high opportunity cost, and so learn something that you would not be able to learn on your own, and that will be foundational in the rest of your life. For example, it's better to do math and never go into a math-related career than it is to, for example, say, do history and not go into a history-related career, because the foundation in math is helpful in so many other ways in your life, whereas history may not apply as broadly. I don't mean to pick on history in particular. I just mean when you get a mismatch between what you studied in school and what you end up doing in life, the consequences of that mismatch are much greater outside of the STEM fields. Am I on a construction site? No. I'm in a commercial kitchen. God, it must be the AirPods. I don't know what else it could be. It must be the AirPods. There's no chair. I'm sitting on the floor. I'm on a cushion on the floor. Okay, I'm gonna hop out. I guess the audio is so bad that it's not worth continuing. Let me try something else on the audio. Give me the sound check now. How's the sound? Oh, so I guess the AirPods were the problem. That's weird. This is just the normal iPhone, nothing special. Well, okay. Anyway, we've been going for quite a while, so we're gonna hop off. I think we're done. People want to keep going? I'm getting tired too. We give 5 more minutes. Let's see if we can get one more rant going, and then we'll drop out. Okay, we'll go for 5 more minutes. You know what I would love? I would love an app where I could just pick one person who has a question, and then I could just press the button and bring them in via audio, and then we could just chat together. We could actually have a conversation. Because what I'd love to be able to do is, I think there are 2 topics that I can share that I think people want to know about, or most people want to know about. One is obviously how to make money, how to create wealth in hopefully a positive sum ethical way. And the second is just how to learn how to be more happy and more peaceful and more content in life. And I used to be poor and miserable, and now I'm pretty peaceful and I'm pretty well off. And so I would love to share those with people, but it's a little weird doing it in the abstract, right? When you go on Twitter and you send out these tweets, you're forced to compress huge amounts of what you think you know into very few words, and it gets misinterpreted, and people don't understand it. It doesn't feel real. It's inspirational, which is great, but even to me it just feels like fortune cookie advice. So what I'd love to be able to do is to actually pick specific people and just talk to them about what their issues are. And that's all. No one needs to pay me. It's just for fun. Yeah, I could do that on Instagram Live, except I never want to open Instagram. Just the idea of a community around photo sharing, it's not who I am. I like Twitter because ideas. I don't want to live in a world of photos. Instagram seems like a big world of look at me, envy inducing. If you want to talk Rene Girard and mimetic theory, that's all on display on Instagram. Do I have a view on someone spending $100 million on a boat? Yeah, they spent it. So it went to the boat makers and the people working the boat yards, and those people spend it on food, and money gets spent on all kinds of things. We spend trillions of dollars on blowing people up and on aircraft and aircraft carriers and submarines and nuclear weapons. I mean, most money gets wasted most of the time. That's just the nature of the beast. But you have to let that process play out. The moment you inject your finger in that process and you destroy the market that exists there, then all you replace it with is power. And when you come in with power and force, you stop creativity. You scare off the makers. The history of the human civilization, a lot of it is just this battle between kind of producers and parasites. And there's always more parasites than producers. And the beauty of a country like the United States, where there's free markets and rule of law, is that the producers actually get to have a play for a while. And if you open the door to people sort of seizing what they're creating, you're going to then force away the producers. You're going to create a parasite economy. It's not good. So if somebody wants to blow $100 million on a yacht, let them. What they actually did was they got rid of $100 million that went into the pockets of people who will hopefully spend it more wisely. If you want to make money, sell things to rich people. What do I spend money on? It's a good question. Not a lot. I mean, I don't really even own a big house. We lived in a very small place for a while, and now we're renting a larger place, but we don't, I don't believe in real estate. I fly business class. That's probably about it. I like traveling business class. That's my vice now. That way I can sleep on the plane. But everything else, electronics, I buy the latest Apple products all the time. That's about it. I don't own any jewelry. I don't buy my wife any jewelry. No art. Those are all stupid things. I mean, sure, if you love them, go for it. No, there's no yachts, there's no planes, none of that nonsense. We have a Tesla, so I guess we own one car. Even that, honestly, I could probably do without. Another little luxury is I take a lot of Ubers, Uber X's. Why don't I believe in real estate? I don't think it's a very good investment unless you are a pro at real estate, which I'm not. I'd rather stick to my knitting. And it ties you down. I think just the mobility constraint that it puts on you alone costs you far more than the real estate did. Also in San Francisco, it's just a bad deal. I don't believe in real estate as an investment asset class for non-professionals. If you're a real estate professional, by all means, go for it. If you're not a real estate professional, I don't think it's a good way to make money. Thoughts on dating? Yeah, you should date. I mean, Tinder makes it so easy, right? The tools now are incredible for meeting people. It's just that you're biologically hardwired to not like rejection because we evolved in much smaller groups. But now that we live in these giant cities and we have access to millions of people via Tinder, you kind of just have to get over your fear of rejection. And the more you see, the better decision you'll make when it comes time for you to get married. That said, I think one regret that I do have in life was spending too much time in relationships after I knew they should have ended. It was just a waste of time for everybody, especially the women. How do you tell your future kid that you met their mom on Tinder? I don't know. It's just get over yourself. Get over it. Technology is not good or evil. It's just a tool. It's like, you met her at a Starbucks. What's the difference? Do I have wife issues like we need to talk? There's an old saying that no man is a prophet in his own land. Prophet, no man is a prophet in his own land. That's unfortunately true. You guys want to hear me talk on Periscope. My wife is sick of me. She's great though. She puts up with me. I run very independently. Do you know many founders who are able to keep fitness goals while starting a company? Yeah, the hard thing is like you're supposed to be a tech founder and you're supposed to meditate and you're supposed to work out and you're supposed to eat right and blah, 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 blah. Very hard. Walking meetings helps a lot. I think just keep walking and don't eat too much. Fitness isn't as much about exercise as it is, or at least weight loss is not as much about exercise or intense exercise as it is about just walking a lot and eating less. If you walk a lot and you don't eat too much, you'll be pretty fit. You'll be fit enough. The problem with running 4 miles every other day is when you reach your 40s, you will realize that your knees will give out and it's just not worth it. So running is, fun and beautiful, but boy, the toll on your knees is vicious. So if you're going to run, do it on trails or grass or, use Vibrams or just find a way that's not going to destroy your knees. Too many people I know who are runners or have injuries, and these are not temporary injuries. These are lifelong, chronic sort of injuries. PewDiePie. I have no idea what that controversy is about, but I just think it's really fun to see like a young boy on YouTube taking down the entire media. It's like David and Goliath, and I'm just automatically built to root for David. All right, I think we're running out here, so advice for sleeping. I've used this one before, but try meditating in bed. Either you fall asleep or you meditate. Either way, it's a win. But really the reason you're having trouble sleeping is because your mind is running. And your mind is running is because it's full of unresolved junk. And that's exactly what meditation does. It helps you sort out that unresolved junk. All right, I'm going to hop off. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Thanks for joining. Be well.